Hello there, it is Nick Zangl coming to you live from California at 6 p.m. local time here on this Thursday, May 20th, 2021. We're going to talk about my thoughts on the first episode of the season 11 of The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. I'm going to get into why I'm covering it, kind of as someone who doesn't look like someone who would cover or watch The Real Housewives, what it all means in a second, and my thoughts on this episode. But before that, I'm going to welcome you. If you're watching live in the live chat, make sure to say hi as you join. And if you're watching the replay, there will be timestamps in the description if you want to skip to the actual part of me reviewing and giving my thoughts on this episode. And so before that, let me welcome everyone as they join live, and we will start in a few seconds. So just come in and say hi if you're here, and I will get my stuff ready as you come in. Make sure everyone can hear me. I don't think I'm muted or anything, but that should be good. All right. So it looks like everyone is getting in here okay, so I'm going to get started here. Let me make sure I have all my stuff ready. All right, so let's start with, I think, because a lot of people I know who maybe watch my channel maybe don't watch this show, and I still want you to be able to enjoy this content if you want. And so I thought I would start with kind of a cast overview and who's on this cast of Real Housewives before I get into kind of my brief history with the Real Housewives and why I'm covering it this time and this season and this city. And so the first thing I want to do is do the cast overview. So this is if you maybe aren't someone who watches the show, but you want to follow along when I'm reviewing each episode every week and kind of why this is interesting or important or who these people really are, right? So, and one, if you don't know, then you'll be able to see kind of who I'm talking about as I point to them. So I'm going to start with Erika here on the left-hand side. So Erika, the reason you may or may not know her is you may not know her, but you may know her soon-to-be ex-husband, which that's going to be a huge centerpiece of the entire season. So I'm not going to give too much away now about that because it's going to be covered in the season. But basically, her soon-to-be ex-husband is a lawyer, or was a lawyer, who his big case that he was famous from was the Aaron Brockovich whole thing, and so that's what he was really known for. He's been a very high-profile attorney here in California for a long time. The centerpiece, it appears, of the season is going to be the legal troubles between their marriage, meaning divorce, and Tom, the lawyer, his legal issues as former clients of his are coming forward with very, very serious allegations regarding stealing funds and using funds, all these allegations, and it's going to be pretty interesting to see it play out on the season. So she is basically what I'm seeing as the centerpiece of the whole season so far, even though there are other storylines with the other girls, but it looks like they're all going to have their say on what's going on. Make sure everyone's coming in okay. Okay, perfect. Then we go to Garcelle here. Let me make sure you can see my cursor. There we go. So Garcelle here, second from the left, is currently, well, she's on the show, but she was an actress, and she is one of the co-hosts on the panel show, which is like a View style panel which is geared towards more women of color and minorities, if you will, called The Real. And you probably heard of that when it was on a few years ago. When it first started, it had Tamar Braxton, it had Tamara Mowry Housley, who was sister. It has Adrienne Bailon, who was a Disney Channel star who was on the Cheetah Girls. She dated Rob Kardashian, all that kind of stuff. Comedian Lonnie Love, and then Jeannie Mai, who just married a rapper, Jeezy. So that's Garcelle's doing a lot of stuff in the entertainment world right now, and then we see her life played out on this show, and she's going to be a big part of the season, obviously, because she's on the show. But then we have the third from the left, who is the newest cast member, who is her first season, and she is not being a friend. She's actually going to be a full-time housewife. Her name is Crystal Kung Minkoff, and she's okay. So we're going to learn more about her in this episode, which I'm going to get into, but she is her connection to the show is she is friends with Kathy Hilton, who is the half sister of the girl next to Crystal in this picture, who is Kyle, which I'll get to in a second who she is. But Crystal, she is married to her husband, obviously, but he was the director of, well known for being the director of the animated Lion King back in the 90s, and so that'll come up later as well. But she clearly can hold her own because she's on the show as herself, but that is her connection to Beverly Hills and how she is known and in this circle. Then we get to Kyle Richards, who's in the center here. She's been on the show since the beginning of The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Like I said, her half-sister is a friend of the show, Kathy Hilton, which is why she's not pictured in this promo picture. But we will see her, and I have a feeling, from what my instincts so far from the first episode, I think she may, if she wants, maybe she doesn't want to be a full-time, but I think maybe next season, if things play out the way I think they might play out, that she will get a diamond, is what they call it. Yeah. So, okay, so Kyle, you may know her from, she was a child actress, and her big claim to fame, from what I understand, is she was one of the little girls in the original Halloween movies back in the 70s, I guess, or the 80s. Was it the 80s, 70s? But anyways, she's reviving that role, and she's been in other things too. But her husband is Mauricio, who he worked for the Hilton real estate world because obviously his sister-in-law's husband, Rick Hilton, is a Hilton heir, and then obviously Kathy Hilton is the mom of Paris Hilton. We all know who Paris Hilton is. And then they all have connections to the Kardashians. So it's this very interesting universe going on here. Let me see. Did I miss anything else with Kyle? There's a lot. I'll probably touch on more as we go on. Yeah, so that's Kyle. If you don't know who this is Lisa Rinna. And speaking of Kardashian connections, we learned in this preview that I'm going to talk about in a second. I'm sorry, there's kids outside running by. But one of her daughters is actually going to be dating, or going to share that she's dating. We all knew this in real life, but on the show we're going to see how Lisa Rinna reacts to her daughter dating Scott Disick, who is an ex and also the baby daddy of Kourtney Kardashian's kids on the Kardashians. So it's a very interesting dynamic there with all this going on. So there was rumors that Kris Jenner, who's the mom of all the Kardashians and ex-wife of Caitlyn Jenner now, who I've talked about on this channel, that she might join the show as a friend or as a housewife since the Kardashians are ending. But time will tell. Maybe this relationship with Scott Disick and Lisa's daughter may be kind of a natural in for something like that to happen. So we'll see what happens with that, or maybe to have one of the Kardashian girls, maybe Kourtney, to be a housewife eventually. But she has been clear that she doesn't really like the attention anymore of the reality TV world, so I don't think that would make sense. Anyways, let's move on to the second from the right, Sutton in the pink. Sutton Stracke. You probably wouldn't know if you didn't watch the show, because this is kind of her first big thing coming out in the media, even though I think she was kind of a socialite and known in the Beverly Hills world because she was married to someone pretty prominent. I'm not sure exactly who, but apparently she got a huge settlement or got some things from the divorce, which is where we met her last season. So it'll be interesting to see what more we learn from her, and I really like her. So she got promoted last season from a friend of a housewife to a full-time housewife. So I think that was really good. And then last but not least, we have Dorit here on the end, who is married to PK. That's her husband, which we'll see him. We'll see him soon. But he was friends with Lisa Vanderpump, who used to be on the show, and now she has her Vanderpump Rules and her own show on E! You've probably seen her a lot of places, but that was her into the show, and we've come to know her through this show. And so let me make sure I'm not forgetting anybody. Yeah, so Sutton and Dorit you would know from the show, but you'll learn more as we go on here. Before I go on, let me make sure I see everybody. Hello, Tennessee Vol Mom and UC Boss. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to share this. I know I'm about to get into my explanation on what the heck I'm doing covering Real Housewives, because I know some people, if you've been on my channel for a while, you're probably not surprised, but if you're new, let me explain. So the reason I'm really covering the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills in particular, and this season in particular as well, is because of the entire situation, which we know in real life is happening with Erika, who's the blonde right here, in her real life between her and her soon-to-be ex-husband and his legal issues, their legal issues. And so I think it'll be very interesting to see it unfold. And it appears that they are going to show everything, and that Erika, from what we've heard from interviews from the cast and what they said on Watch What Happens Live, which is the after show with Andy Cohen, after this episode, is that Erika showed up to every scene. She did not quit. She did not run from anything. And when the cast members addressed her, it appears we get some pretty dang good reality TV. So maybe if you're like me, where the last few years I've kind of been popping in and out of these shows, this might be the time to jump back in if you haven't. And if you've ever wondered about what Real Housewives is, I think this season of this franchise in particular is the one that I think I would jump in on, because they're going to flash back to a lot of things. They're going to do a lot of storytelling. It's going to be something that's unfolding in the media, and we're kind of seeing the inner workings of it. Side note on this, I think this is where the Real Housewives franchise does it best, because apparently in their contracts, which I've touched on before when I touched on the Real Housewives of New Jersey premiere a few months ago, at the beginning of this year, I should say, in their contracts, from what is alleged and what is reported, obviously I don't know if they would share their contracts, but it's been reported that in their contracts, there are clauses in there that cast members cannot sue each other for defamation or whatever for things said on the show during filming. And so that to me is great for this storyline with Erika and her husband, because that means these cast members don't have the fear of retaliation legally from each other to confront Erika about what's going on. So I think if that is true, that their contracts have that clause in it, it's going to be very interesting. So we'll see how that plans out. But it's also fascinating, the Erika story, one, because we know it's going to be covered on the show, but it covers so much ground that are all fascinating to a lot of different people, and it all kind of merges into one story, which is legal issues, legal prying, and as Emily D. Baker, who is a legal commentator online, who's one of my favorites. I'll link her stuff down below after we're done here, but she's been covering like the legal documents and breaking it down from a legal perspective. But in that legal perspective, which is something she's touched on, is we get to pry into these people's lives even more than the reality show shows. And so it's very fascinating to see kind of the lifestyle of the rich and famous from this perspective, as unfortunately their world is crumbling as a result of what is alleged them taking advantage of other people who maybe aren't as fortunate. So that's one aspect of this, why it's interesting. Culturally, it's interesting because it's a reality show, and just these are some famous people as well. Politically, there is implications that some of the money that was used allegedly improperly was used for political influence and means, so that's interesting too. And of course, economically, as someone who is not even near as wealthy and well off as these people, as I'm sure many of you probably feel the same way, and we'll touch on that in this episode in a few seconds, that is very interesting as well. Of course, we all aspire to be somewhat well off, but I don't know, if you see these types of wealthy people with all the problems they have, maybe you don't want to get that wealthy. I don't know. And then as far as Real Housewives and why I'm covering it, you're probably looking at me like, you don't look like you would watch Real Housewives. You're not a woman. You don't know these people. Why are you covering this? Well, in a way, I do have a connection because I grew up in the area near where the whole Real Housewives franchise and the whole series took off and really started. And so from the beginning, even though I was pretty young, it was always interesting to see that evolve, because I knew a lot of the places where they were filming and some of the people that were involved. I had only maybe 1 or 2 degrees of separation from, we'll just say that, not to give too much away. Maybe at some point I'll share more, but that's part of it. And even though recently I haven't watched every episode of every city because some of them I had to like pick and choose as my life evolved and got busier. But I thought recently this whole franchise, all the cities were going downhill until these very real stories came to fruition this past year. So it's very interesting. And it's sucking me back in all the way for this one. And I will probably be covering Orange County when that comes back because they're reviving that. And that's the one that started it all and where I'm from. So there's that. Okay, let's see. Let me make sure everyone's doing good. I know this is kind of a long-winded intro, but I wanted to make sure that I prefaced this before because I'm going to be covering every episode every week. So I'm just like making sure. UC Boss says, I've never watched the show. That's totally okay. I'm going to try to cover it and talk about each storyline in a way that we can still have a conversation, even if you haven't seen the show before. So I'm hoping that, yeah, Tennessee Vol Mom says, haven't watched this one, but I have watched a little bit of Salt Lake City, but that's it. I think the Salt Lake one is very interesting too because they have legal issues going on there for the next season. UC Boss says, okay, you said you're just too Southern. You know what's funny about this? Actually, speaking of growing up in OC and kind of where this all started, I have a lot of family in the Midwest, in South Dakota and that area, in Colorado, that area. And they would always be interested in hearing what we think of the Housewives because a lot of my family, we grew up in where it started. And so, and they knew we had some connections to the Housewives. And so they would always think like, oh, it's crazy. Like you live in California, you must know all these famous people. And what's funny is, although I grew up in Orange County and the Beverly Hills Housewives are in LA County, it seemed like worlds away, even though it was like a 40-minute drive for me. As far as local news, we covered the same ground, but it's very interesting to see the difference between the Orange County Housewives and the Beverly Hills, even though I lived near one and I don't have the same life as them, but that's kind of my unique perspective, is that I kind of was in the world, but not really in the world, if that makes sense. So it'll be very interesting. Tennessee, South Dakota, and Colorado is Midwest. I mean, I consider them Midwest, like Great Plains, Kansas, because I thought West was like west of the Mississippi River. And I know some people consider Midwest like the Great Lakes, like Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I consider like all that kind of the Midwest, if that makes sense. Maybe not. But that's what I think of when I think of Midwest. But maybe it's not that. But anyways, because I think of Southwest as like Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And then yeah, see, like Ohio, I think is kind of right. They're like on the border kind of thing. So, or I think Ohio is I think of Ohio as kind of Great Lakes, if that makes sense. All the Great Lakes, I don't know. And then I think of like Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming as kind of like Mountain West, if that makes sense. So, anyways, we can have a whole conversation about that, but we'll talk about that again. Okay. So let me get back to this for a second. I'll check in with the chat in a few seconds, but stick with me. Okay, and I saw that UC Boss says, I thought Michigan was, yes, we are, okay. And UC Boss says, I really like reality shows though. Yeah, this is a good one if you want to get popping. If you haven't seen this one yet, this one might be a good one to catch up on. Like I said, this is the 11th season, so there's a lot of history that I think they're going to go back through, especially with Erika being the centerpiece. They're going to be flashing back a lot. So anyways, let me make sure I got everything in my preface before I go on. Okay, perfect. All right. So now let's get into this episode, the premiere episode. I'm going to be kind of sharing, it's going to be a combo of a recap and my thoughts on some of the storylines that are being introduced, as this is just the premiere. So we're just kind of scratching the surface here. But let's get into this. Make sure you can see. Okay, so I took screenshots of different parts so you kind of have a visual with what's going on, so you don't have to like imagine in your brain in case you didn't watch it yet, or you know what to look for if you go back and watch the episode. So it started with the trailer that we already saw leading up to this episode, leading up to the premiere, which was really touching on and dramatizing the Erika situation. This is Erika. And the lawsuit and the divorce, and they were very briefly alluding to her opening up, and there was all packaged in the game Two Truths and One Lie, which is what Dorit was bringing up. And so they were kind of alluding to the fact that we're going to find out what are the truths and what are the lies regarding Erika and all their lives. So I thought that was very interesting. And one note, and I know Erika doesn't like this on the show from the past, is what's interesting about Erika's issues going on right now is her son, her biological son, not with her husband, who we're going to touch on in a little bit about that whole situation, is in law enforcement. So I always wonder what it's like to either be in law enforcement and have family have legal issues, or you be the one having legal issues and knowing and having family that's close in law enforcement. I'm always interested to see kind of what that does to the dynamic of the family. I have a feeling we're not going to see what that deals with her son unless it's brought up in the reunion or by Andy Cohen or by one of the castmates. But we know from the past that Erika gets very protective and defensive and angry when her son is brought up in general. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm curious to see if that comes up. But it also looks like we're going to touch on, like I said before, when I was introducing the cast. Hold on one second. We are going to hear about Lisa Rinna's daughter dating Scott Disick, who Kardashian adjacent. In that trailer, we saw that, so that might be a big storyline. We're going to see a lot of racial talk between either Sutton and Crystal, who is the new cast member who is Chinese. And later we find out that there's going to be that same kind of talk between Garcelle, who is a black cast member, and Kyle. So it'll be very interesting to see how all that plays out. And because Garcelle is friends with Sutton, and Sutton might have a problem with Crystal, I'm curious to see what Garcelle is going to think of that whole situation. So we'll see. And I'm not shocked that they're going to bring in the racial aspect because it was 2020, and obviously they filmed this, I feel like they started last summer, end of summer, and then into the fall when everything was unveiled about Erika and stuff. So not surprised because, one, it was a big conversation in general, but also the reality is Bravo is owned by Comcast, or NBC Universal Comcast, which is one of the biggest media companies in the world. And we know the media is very, especially this past year, pushing the racial aspect of things. And so this is Bravo is a media company, content company. And so there is some level, in my opinion, of agenda setting with the footage they have, if they can push it that way. And there is some producing going on, even if not all of their footage had that angle to it. So there is that aspect. All right, so let's get into Act 1. So I'm broken into act. Basically, each act is like between each commercial. So from the beginning to the first commercial, and then first commercial to the next, and blah, blah, blah. There's 5 total acts. So act number 1. It started with, I forgot to show, this is Erika crying, there's Scott, I keep forgetting I have pictures here, so, and that was kind of the picture between Sutton and Crystal. Looks like that's going to happen next week's episode. So we start with Act 1. Here's Kyle with her new healing nose, and Lisa Rinna in her house on her bed. They were just catching up, and Kyle basically alluded to she hurt her nose while filming the new Halloween movie, which is the second in the trilogy, the new trilogy of the new movies. This one is called Halloween Kills. It's the sequel to the 2018 Halloween revival, and looks like she's actually going to reprise her role in that movie. And it looks like she hurt her nose, and so she ended up getting a nose job and a new nose. So I just think it's great that she's open, that she said while they were in there, they just fixed whatever I wanted fixed. So I thought that was funny. But one note I thought was interesting here was that they got to film mask-free most of the time, and I thought that was very interesting because, in my opinion, because they are kind of elite and well-connected and part of a media company, one, I think they might have been exempt anyway from certain restrictions, but to me, that was when the pandemic response was over, in my opinion, because the affluent, in this case, got to work in California, And so, in my opinion, if they got to work, so could everyone else. And it was interesting because the people making the rules, like Governor Gavin Newsom, is associated with the Erika and her husband situation. So I'll be curious to see how that unfolds as well. And I'll leave the intricacies, the legal stuff, to the legal commentators because they get in. Emily D. Baker, the one who's been covering this a lot, gets into that in the legal documents when it's brought up. And that's part of another reason why I'm so fascinated with this is everything unfolding. So anyways, side note though, is during this part, Erika and Dorit were driving over to Kyle's house to meet with Lisa, Rinna, and her. And if you go back and watch this, if you haven't watched it yet, let me know what you think of Erika's voice. Because she's always had kind of a nasally voice, but for some reason, it feels like this new episode, her voice has just gotten so nasally. I don't know what it is, but something like it just, I don't know. I noticed it. Maybe I'm looking too much into this, but if you go and watch the episode, come back here and let me know what you think, or let me know as the season goes on if you think the same thing. So that was a side note, but then we go on to Kyle and Lisa talking about how they're kind of on the outs with Garcelle. And next, then we see Sutton and Garcelle hanging out. This is not them hanging out there in the filming, but this is the clearest picture I got that they showed. And Sutton and Crystal seem to get into the race conversation later, which will be alluded to in the preview, and it looks like it's going to actually come up in the next few episodes. And like I said before, I'll be interested to see how that unfolds because Garcelle's friends with Sutton, but Sutton is going to seemingly be put on the spot about her views on other people's races, and Garcelle's going to do the same thing with Kyle. So it'll be interesting to see if Garcelle kind of keeps the same standard for different people on the show. I'll be very interested to see how that goes. And then it sounds like also that Sutton is going to kind of play the role of peacemaker this season in the way that she's dealing with talking to Garcelle about making up with Lisa, Rinna, and Kyle. So, because you'll see later that Sutton is actually renting Kyle's old house. So it's very interesting. I love when there's a lot of intricate, lot of different ties within the group because it actually makes it feel real, which I hope it is real, but you know what I mean? Like it actually makes it very interesting to see the dynamic, which would happen in real life. Okay, then we go to another note I thought of, which is that, so Dorit and Erika were traveling to see Kyle and Lisa Rinna at Kyle's house, and I just still think it's so weird seeing Dorit and Erika friends, because if you've been watching the show for a long time, when Dorit came onto the show, I believe it was Erika's second or third season. So this is Erika and this is Dorit. And there was the whole thing about Pantygate, which basically, long story short, Dorit's husband was sitting across from Erika when they first met, or one of the few first times they met, and it looked like Erika didn't have any panties on. And so that became a whole thing because when Dorit and her husband came on the show, they were kind of stuck up and kind of like prim and proper because he's British and she had that quote unquote fake accent. They were friends with Lisa Vanderpump, and so that was a thing, and it's very interesting to see this friendship evolve to where it is now, which is also part of why Real Housewives is so interesting, because every season it seems like relationships keep turning over and different dynamics form and all that kind of stuff. So I think this is one that's going to be very interesting. It'll be interesting to see if Dorit challenges Erika on the legal situation that's going on. So Erika, Dorit, Kyle, and Lisa are then at Kyle's house in the bed, kind of chatting as friends. And they were talking about Kyle's husband, who is pictured here as well. And I thought it was a funny moment because it was kind of relatable and kind of, I thought it was great that they put it in there because, one, I think it was on social media, but also it kind of gives a little bit of relatability to the group, even though on the outside they don't look very relatable at all to most people, but that's why we watch them, about getting a haircut during quarantine. And basically that Mauricio, the husband, was growing the top of his head out, and Kyle was just shaving the sides, and he called it a mohawk, like Mauricio mohawk. Here's a picture of it, and I thought it was really funny and kind of a relatable moment. I thought it was good because clearly I'm dealing with this too, so I'm like, okay, I feel less alone here. What was interesting was Erika used it as a moment to, I don't want to say bash her husband at the time, but basically just kind of joke that he's older and he doesn't have any hair, so Kyle should be lucky that her husband has hair. Thought it was interesting. And of course, I think I'm reading more into these little comments, and maybe they strategically left those comments in from Erika as kind of like cookie crumble, like a trail of cookie crumbles leading to the big scandal that we know is coming in the season. I'm thinking that's probably what their strategy was. But I thought it was smart for them to throw the comment about Mauricio, and it was a good segue into Erika's comments about her husband. And I want to say too that relatability, even though they're very wealthy, about the haircut thing is also why the kind of the Orange County Housewives back when they first started were, I think, able to become so popular is because they showed a lot, even though I don't think the economic situation in 2008 was as bad as what happened this past year. Maybe we haven't seen the worst of it yet. I don't know, but they showed people like Tamara and her husband at the time losing their house. We saw how divorces and as a result of financial problems affected Gina Keogh at the time, who was a real estate agent, and she actually had a booming business because she was helping all these houses divide and split assets and buy new houses separately. So I think that is what, unfortunately, kind of the good and the bad with Real Housewives is during these times that are kind of crazy, if they keep the cameras rolling and allow for real stuff to happen, it actually helps the show and helps everyone else kind of feel a little less kind of alone and brings us a little bit together, if that makes sense. But I'll be curious to see what your thoughts are in the comments after this first act. I'll get to them in a few seconds. But actually, I'm going to get to them right now. So that was the first act. Here's Erika's husband, with, if you didn't know how much older he was, but we'll get to the next part in a few seconds. Let me get to your chat really quick. See if anyone has any thoughts. Okay, we're talking about UC Boss says, I like Lisa. Yeah, I mean, I like that she says what's on her mind, even if it gets her in trouble. I mean, that's what's good about her. The thing I kind of worry about is, are you talking about Lisa Vanderpump or Lisa Rinna? That's my question. Tennessee Volmom, it is on Wednesday nights at 8. So it was on last night. So we're about a day from it. So I'm going to try to do these episodes each week on Thursday night. So that way you have at least a day to watch. But if that makes sense. So hopefully that gives you time to watch if you want. UC Boss says, I was born in Detroit. Cool. Okay, perfect. So everyone's good. Yeah, so it's on Wednesday nights at 8 on Bravo. So if you want to catch up. Right now, I think the first episode, they have it on the Bravo YouTube channel for free right now. But I think they only do that with the premiere. So there's that. All right. So that all happened before the first commercial break, which is crazy. So let's get into the second act of 5. And it starts out with us being at Dorit's house in Encino, where her and her husband live, and has this farmhouse style architecture, which is very common in that newer part of Encino. Fun fact about Encino, because of course I am in California and I am from Southern California, so I travel within that area and go through the LA area often, and when I'm traveling and whatnot and visiting different family members. So Encino is where I've only been there a few times, but the last time I stopped there was almost a year. I think it was about a year ago. Right when the mask mandates were coming into effect here in California. So I think it was about this time last year, maybe June. And I stopped there to go to the Dunkin' Donuts to get a coffee. And it was the middle of the day. It was super hot out, or not super hot. It was warm, but it was sunny. And all I remember from Encino was, I don't think it was the quote unquote nicer part of town, if that makes sense, because obviously they live in a very upscale neighborhood, kind of in the hills. And I literally just opened the door to my car to get out, to go walk in to get my Dunkin', because I ordered ahead of time so I wouldn't have to wait in there. And an unsheltered individual is what their politically correct term is for homeless people here in California now, yelled at me from across the parking lot, like almost across the street. He's like, "Why don't you have your mask on?" I was like, I barely got out of my car. And he didn't even know if I had one in my hand. I was about to put it on or not. So I just ignored him. But that was my impression, my last impression of Encino. So I just thought I would throw that in there because clearly that doesn't add up to what is being shown on the show, which is where Kyle and Dorit both live in Encino. So there's quite the contrast in even cities within Los Angeles and whatnot. And it's funny because it's called Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, but most of them don't actually live in Beverly Hills. I think Erika's house, which we're going to talk about in a few seconds, is in Pasadena. Encino is a different city. It's not Beverly Hills. Lisa Rinna, I think, lives in Malibu. And although they're all in Los Angeles County, and people say they live in LA when they live in these different neighborhoods and different cities, they're not really, I don't think, all considered the same city. They're in the same county, but it's just funny. Anyways, that's a whole nother thing. Even with the Orange County situation, I can get into that for days, but whatever. We'll table that conversation for another time. So that's my thoughts on Encino. And then we got into this part, which is interesting, which is that Sutton is now renting Kyle's house she used to live in. Apparently they still own it. That was on the show. It was her second house on the show, Kyle's second house on the show from a few seasons ago. And that one is in Bel Air, which is also next to Beverly Hills and next to UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. You probably heard of it before. It's all right in that area, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, kind of UCLA and all that. So I thought that was very interesting. And what's interesting, they have the name crossed off there, which is really funny. But also, they revealed that Sutton rents the house for $20,000 a month. And when I saw that, I mean, I guess it's all perspective, but like, I'm like, that's like 10 times plus more than my monthly rent in my place. And it's like, it's probably like, when I think of the amount I pay versus the size of that house, it's probably like not proportional. 10 times the size of my place is probably way smaller than that place. But anyways, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes into that. I know, like property tax and all that kind of stuff, but in maintenance. But anyways, that was sticker shock. But the reason she's renting it is because her $5 million house that she's renovating after she had just sold her $7 million house, Sutton, that's why she's renting Kyle's house. And that was a discount from the $25,000 a month that they actually asked for if you want to rent that house. So I thought that was very interesting, and it puts kind of into perspective what these people's realities are. And clearly Sutton isn't hurting from what's been happening over the past year. So anyways, and I try not to bash people for that, because I know that, like I said, there's a lot of industries that rely on and are funded by that lifestyle. Whether you think that's right or wrong, we can have another conversation about. But when I think about all the maintenance people that are employed because of the houses like that, and landscaping and construction and street maintenance and all the things, and the tax that pays for a lot of jobs too. So it's one of those things. I'm like, okay, let's not bash it too much. It is interesting though. As far as, and then we have, what I thought was another interesting part, which is Garcelle meeting with Lisa Rinna to kind of start repairing their friendship from the past few years. And it's interesting because the conversation was really about kind of wrapping up, which I think is why wrapping up drama that was left over from last season's reunion with Denise Richards, who used to be on the show. She was only on the show for 2 seasons, but she kind of quit. And so they had to, from what I understand, from a producing, storytelling, TV show perspective, had to kind of wrap up some lingering drama between these two to kind of tie up and end Denise's storyline and then continue it on with these two and kind of their journey to repairing their friendship. And so I thought that was very interesting that Denise Richards isn't even on the show anymore, but she is still a main storyline, at least at the moment. And Lisa Rinna did the classic apology, "I'm sorry if I hurt you." And I was pleasantly surprised, or I was happy that Garcelle was a little wary to accept that apology, because I think if you're going to say, "I'm sorry if," then maybe you don't actually feel sorry, or you don't know why you should be sorry or what you did wrong. And so in my opinion, I'd rather have someone just not apologize than to give a fake apology. And so I think that's why I like Garcelle a lot, is because she caught that and pretty much called her out and kind of gave her a few of those faces that were kind of like, I don't know if I believe you. So we'll see that kind of, I think, unfold as this episode goes on and as the season goes on, and we'll see what happens and see how long it takes. And I think Garcelle was also spot on when she said that Lisa Rinna appears to be, quote unquote, owning it quickly, which is one of Lisa Rinna's signature phrases that she said about owning it, and that she's owning it very quickly because Lisa Rinna may be afraid of Garcelle. And I like that Garcelle was open to going on to the road of regaining trust and rebuilding their friendship, but was kind of wary about it. And I think that's a very real thing to show, and that's why I like Garcelle a lot. Because in real life, after you have problems in any relationship, whether it's whoever is involved, whether it's 2 guys, 2 girls, guy, girl, marriage, anything, coworker, friend, I don't know, where there's some trust broken and there's something that goes wrong, it isn't just one lunch or one drink and a 5-minute conversation and then everything is okay and back to normal. And so that's why, again, like I said, I like Garcelle and why she is so real and why she fits so well being a co-host on The Real, because she's actually real in my opinion. So there's that. But about just in general, this picture I put on here, just my observations from this is so interesting because it goes back to what I talked about regarding Real Housewives of Orange County, which is actually showing what's really happening, which is we all have been at some point this past year had to, if we went out, had to eat outside in a parking lot in a makeshift situation like this. And so I thought it was good that they showed kind of the wide shot of that. They weren't trying to cover it up or hide it. They were just like, this is what it is. Look, we're all spaced apart. You can see there's people looking, which is funny because I don't think I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes them filming a Real Housewives of Orange County, which is where I grew up. I have seen them filming something on like a rooftop like thing along the beach in like Laguna Beach, but I'd never figured out what they were actually filming. I couldn't tell who was involved or what was going on. It could have been a pilot for something that never really happened or some show I've never heard of, but it's always interesting to see kind of in the background who's watching and whatnot. And to me, that when I see people doing that, it's always like, that means that this is kind of a legit real situation. They didn't like pay actors to do anything, which maybe they normally do, but maybe they couldn't now because of COVID. But and I thought it was interesting because although this setup that they showed kind of takes away from the glitz and glamour that we're used to seeing on Beverly Hills regarding when they used to go to Lisa Vanderpump's restaurant, which is on Rodeo Drive, basically, or going to these very upscale places, I thought this was good. And like I said, it shows the reality of what was going on. And a lot of restaurants were really hurting, even in that area where there's a lot of wealthy people. So it's very interesting, and it adds another aspect of that realness. So let me check the chat, and then I'll go on to Act 3 out of 5. Let's see if anyone has any thoughts. All right, looks like everyone's good. All right, so let's go into Act 3, which opens up at Erika's Pasadena house. Now, this is the house that is currently for sale. I don't remember if it's been sold yet or not, but basically they had to sell it as an asset to pay off legal fees and clients that were involved in the lawsuit that we're going to see play out on the show. And this is where she lives with her lawyer husband, who we showed, that the older man that we showed earlier. And then we show the team that was paid for, from what we've seen from the lawsuits, allegedly by money that was funded through her husband that he got allegedly in nefarious ways. And I want to say too that I didn't write this down, but her interview look, which I showed earlier, or her vibe in her interviews, in her confessionals, which is the thing they cut to in between the real footage and the raw footage. Let me know what you think when you watch the show back, but something was off. It just seems like, and I'm not sure when they filmed those confessionals, if they do some throughout like actual filming of production, and then they come back later to add in anything for storytelling purposes or for different sound bites or different things. I am aware that they pick now, whereas way back when they would film them in their houses, I think, and do it all at once, I think. But now they do it in front of a green screen, and they pick certain looks, I think, a handful of them, for continuity purposes, I believe, and they can like switch in the different hair and makeup looks and their outfits, and they can refilm parts, as from what I understand. And so I don't know when these are filmed, but it's just something is off with Erika's confessionals. I don't know what it's about. Maybe there's nothing there, but I think it's very interesting. But so the guy in this picture, right here, Mikey, you may know him from, he's been around for a long time. I think he worked with the Pussycat Dolls, and he was featured in early seasons of Keeping Up with the Kardashians when Kim Kardashian did the Pussycat Doll lounge thing in Vegas. I think he was with Gretchen Rossi from Orange County when she did the Pussycat Doll thing. And then recently, he actually appeared on a YouTube video of Whitney Port, who was a star on The Hills, the reality show The Hills, with Lauren Conrad and Heidi Montag, all those people. Whitney Port does reaction videos to each episode of that on her channel with her husband, Timmy. And I've been enjoying that because I liked the show The Hills. I used to watch that, and I like seeing a cast member reacting to it and kind of giving behind the scenes things. But they pointed out that Mikey was in an episode there where he was working fashion something for one of the people in the show. I forget who it was, but so it's very interesting to see all these worlds kind of colliding into one thing. So it's very interesting that it's not usually a coincidence that they end up on these shows. So anyways, and I put a note here too that Erika's overflow closet is bigger than my entire place that I live in. So there's some perspective on how big her house is. So there's that. And then the last part of this act was with Garcelle and Dorit. And really the takeaway from this scene, besides them kind of throwing subtle shade at Kyle and the back and forth, or the switch between Garcelle and Sutton's conversation regarding that, and then Kyle and her talking with Lisa Rinna as they're traveling to meet Crystal. Let me know what this outfit, I mean, I don't know too much about fashion, but I do not understand this look. I mean, I get it's Chanel. I mean, that's a high-end look, and she was with Dorit, who is known for kind of extravagant looks. So let me know what you think. Does this look good, or do you think it's kind of absurd, some of these high-end fashion looks? I don't know. I don't get it. But besides the subtle shade that I said was thrown at Kyle, and the interlude between Kyle and Lisa Rinna in the car, also, we learned that Garcelle wore this to a Zoom meeting. So I'm guessing the Zoom meeting was for promotion for maybe The Real or one of her other projects. So she wasn't going to like a board meeting in a Zoom call like that. So there's that. But then we cut to Kyle talking about her involvement with Children's Hospital Los Angeles, which I thought was also an interesting tie because one, they were going over to deliver games to Crystal's house for like a fundraiser for the kids in the hospital. And so they brought up a former or a fundraiser from years past with Jamie Lee Curtis, who was was Kyle's co-star in the original Halloween, which, as you see, I alluded to that they are reviving that, and she is reviving her role. So I think it is very interesting that, like I said before, all these worlds that seem to be all kind of disjointed are all kind of coming together in this new season, which is why it just adds so many layers of interest for me. And when this fundraiser happened years ago with Jamie Lee Curtis on the show, I don't think there was any talks, or at least we didn't know of any talks of the revival of that. And it's cool that Jamie Lee and Kyle have stayed in touch all those years later. I thought that was very interesting. So before we move on to the fourth act, which is the second to last, let me see if anyone has any comments. All right, looks like we're good. I know there's a lot to take in, and a lot of you are probably on the replay kind of figuring this out and thinking about what you want to say, but let's go to Act 4. All right, so Act 4 is where we start with going to meet Crystal. So we have Kyle and Lisa Rinna going to meet Crystal. And one thing I thought about was, so Lisa Rinna and Kyle were in the car maskless. They put on their mask to get out of the car and to go to the front door of Crystal and her husband's house. And then they get in and take off the mask. I'm just like, what's the point? Just leave it off. We know you're on the show. We know you have some special privilege. Just leave it off. If you're going to be in the car with it off and you're going to walk up with it on, like, just leave it off. Anyways. And then we got an intro into Crystal, and this is a picture that they showed of her and her husband, who is a Hollywood bigwig director. He directed The Lion King, and they went on to share that they met when she was 20, and she is from the Valley, basically, which is the other side that is north of the Hollywood Hills and Beverly Hills. And so what's interesting is this is kind of, I think, because we've seen Erika and her husband have a huge age difference on the show already, that this doesn't seem weird that there's a big age difference between them. So I think that's what's cool about this. So other part, when they were meeting Crystal and her husband, was Lisa Rinna was talking about name dropping and how it's kind of cool to know people and blah, blah, blah. And then Crystal, they were focusing on, I feel like I skipped something. Okay. They were focusing on her and talking about her Chinese heritage, which I think is great to learn about on any show, but I hope they show more sides to her than just that and don't keep focusing on that, because I feel like she's has more dimensions than that. And it'll be interesting to see what happens for her and Sutton to clash over race talks. And I think the contrast between, well, it looks like Crystal and Kyle get along, but Garcelle's going to bring race into Kyle and her relationship. And then Garcelle's friends with Sutton, but Sutton's going to be involved with Crystal and some kind of race talk. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. And I think in contrast, in that scene where it was Kyle, Lisa Rinna, and Crystal, the dynamic was interesting because it appears that Lisa Rinna and Crystal are very opposite, very different, but Kyle and Crystal are kind of similar in some ways. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out too. And then a funny part I thought was Dorit and her kids, they were roasting her outfit of her, like her boobs were out, and the little girl said it looked like a robe. And I thought that was really funny because it was kind of true what they were saying. And I thought it showed a more relatable side to Dorit, because I actually like Dorit and her husband more now than I did when they first came on, because I feel like they're opening up a little more and they've had legal troubles, business troubles. And so I think they're being a little more real, and they have a history of being accused of being kind of fake and fakery, but again, it's Beverly Hills, so that's kind of not the most abnormal thing. And so it looks like then we get some proof that Kyle's sister Kathy, who is pictured here with Crystal, that is how they that is Crystal's in, is she knows Kathy, who's obviously a friend of the show, but half sisters with Kyle. And so I'm interesting to see. I would wonder actually how one got chosen for her friend role and one got chosen for a full-time role, how that worked out. So we'll see. But I don't know. I have speculation. I have some thoughts on that, but I don't know. And then, so this is the first scene we see with Kathy, and we also get comments about Crystal saying she felt underdressed going to this barbecue, which I'll touch on in a few seconds. But I thought that was very first season of recent memory of Housewives of Crystal to notice that she's kind of underdressed for them, or she felt underdressed in this case, because it's kind of a first season thing. They kind of glow up, the housewife glow up, as you will, as they go into more seasons. And then she kind of touched on something which I think is very interesting and I actually agree with, is she said she usually dresses different because she's seen older people around her try to dress too young. And she basically said she uses that as to change how she dressed. And I thought that was very interesting because I know I'm probably going to be criticizing Crystal quite a bit this season. And so I'm thinking this might be one of the few things I agree with her on, which is she used, instead of kind of shaming other people the way they dress, she used it as a way to kind of change her own look inward instead of kind of projecting it onto people. So hopefully it sticks that way, but I know I'm going to be fairly critical of some of her stuff that comes out on this season. So I'll start with something nice here. So let's do that. All right, now let's move into the last act number 5. Before I do that, let me check the chat, make sure everyone's good. All right, it looks like everyone's good here. All right, act number 5. So we get into them after the commercial break. We had Crystal and Kathy go into the party at Dorit's house where they were having the barbecue, and everyone was arriving and meeting and whatnot. And Crystal, part of her snobby side came out when she kind of said she was introduced to Dorit and her husband, and she basically alluded to saying, "Oh, I don't know them, but if you don't know someone, maybe they're not worth knowing." And I was like, there we go. It doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from. I think everyone has a side to them that one side of them that's not the most flattering or the most likable. So that seems to be one of her things and what she's kind of bringing at this point, as far as bad things we can talk about regarding Crystal as another dimension of her. But anyways, and I thought it was interesting they were talking about kind of bashing the barbecue set scene, because look at this was their outfits from the barbecue. I don't know if you can see it. Let me show you. These were the barbecue outfits. I don't know about you, but when I go to a barbecue, I'm wearing like flip-flops, shorts, a t-shirt, a ball cap, and I'm just relaxing and wanting to have like a beer or something. I don't know, but it's funny. It's funny because it's entertaining and it's so ridiculous. But anyways, and I don't think of having like a nice fancy glass of some fancy drink. It's usually like corn on the cob and like finger foods and a beer and stuff. So anyways, in a red Solo cup. But anyways, what's funny is Kyle in the past, I think she's thrown the closest thing to a barbecue, like a real barbecue we've seen on this show in the past at her old house. And so, and I think maybe second to that is Erika at her Pasadena house when the whole Munchausen season happened with Yolanda and that whole situation. But then they announced a Tahoe trip that they're going to be taking. It looks like next episode, which is going to be interesting. And I'm glad they're taking a local trip. Obviously, they probably had less to choose from where they could go. But I think it was smart of them to do a trip at the very beginning of the season. One, probably because they just wanted a reason to get away, because a lot of them probably hadn't been traveling much. They probably just wanted to get out too. But also, it's good for them to bond at the beginning of the season, and for us to see them in close quarters, getting to know each other, especially Crystal in the new group, and some of the ones that have been on the outs in under one roof, and to see those kind of growing pains happen on camera, which is what is good about reality TV in this case. And so we'll see how that goes. But I do get also an interesting feeling from Kathy Hilton, who here was in her confessional, and she has a mix between her other sister who used to be on the show, Kim Richards, and her sister who was on the show, Kyle Richards, who they're both full sisters, but Kathy is their half sister. And she has kind of that weird quirk that Kim had. And I think it's a good vibe that we needed back on the show. And so I think it'll be very interesting to see how that kind of works into it. And from what I hear, a lot of people like Kathy Hilton, and they think she's good for the show. So we'll see what happens. But then we start wrapping up the episode, and we have a few side conversations, obviously produced to kind of move the storyline along, with Sutton and Garcelle, who we saw throughout the episode meeting together at the beginning, in the middle. Then we had Dorit and who is it? Dorit and Erika? No, Dorit and Lisa talking about Lisa and Garcelle's lunch meeting. And so these side conversations, Garcelle basically confirms what I kind of said, which is she's kind of playing it by ear with Lisa Rinna. So I thought I was on point with that thought. So now it won't be fixed over one drink or one lunch. And then we get to the end of the episode, and they all basically went around saying what they have learned from the pandemic, and most said they actually liked spending time with their kids. Or Garcelle, she's saying she liked spending time with her kids, but when they weren't there, she was really alone because she wasn't out doing things. And then we got to Erika, and she basically alluded to saying there's, in her confessional, kind of overlapping with this actual scene, she was talking about there are problems in her life that people don't know about, and they are kind of flashing to her home, and just kind of giving us a little teaser of kind of alluding to things. If viewers don't know what's really going on in her life, if they haven't been following it, they kind of get an idea of that's kind of where this is heading, is towards Erika's life basically falling apart. And so when she was referring to when she came home from New York, where she was on Broadway, and she had to end her run early on Broadway in Chicago because of the pandemic, she came home and it was very quiet and very kind of lonely. And she said she went on a medication called Lexapro for her mental challenges. And I thought it was very interesting. And I think she's kind of alluding to the fact that her Erika Jayne persona was at its peak going into the pandemic, and then it completely all got taken away, which was a very common story. But it reminded me also of how kind of arbitrary the conversation around essential and non-essential work was, because not everyone has the same definitions of what is essential and what is not. And also another thing about this is she said the name of the drug. And so I'm thinking maybe either that was product placement for the show, or somehow it got cleared, or this is going to lead to, this is a wild claim, I'm just throwing it out there in case it happens. But, and I wouldn't be surprised considering the financial situation she's going through, but will she get an endorsement deal for that drug or something? I don't know. We'll see. But if the pharmaceutical industry wants to pay Erika so she can pay back her attorneys, and then pay back these people who have been allegedly screwed out of money that they are owed, we can discuss if that is right or not. But anyways, they keep flashing back as the other girls are talking to Erika, saying that the girls don't know what's really going on in her life, and so that's kind of setting up for the rest of the season. So that'll be interesting. And the preview looks like next week is going to be the Tahoe trip, and we're going to get into the race conversation between Garcelle and Kyle and Sutton and Crystal, and kind of start exploring that. So, with that said, this was the first episode, and like every recent season, they're just kind of setting up the main storylines for the rest of the season. because it looks like they basically knew from the beginning what they were going to cover. I did watch one more note. I did watch It Happens Live after this with Andy Cohen, and they kind of touched on some of the same thoughts I had, which was interesting. And so about the barbecue and about the fashion and about Erika's situation and how she's actually not doing press for the show. She did not show up to Watch What Happens Live for obvious reasons because she's going through all this stuff. So I think that's actually going to add even more curiosity to the show, and it's going to make people want to watch the show to hear what she has to say. Because I have a feeling they might be doing no press too, because Bravo has to legally kind of abide by certain things as well, because it's kind of all intertwined legally with the lawsuit and the filming and all that kind of stuff, and what they can show and what they can't maybe. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. And so from the vibe I got from Watch It Happen Live, where everyone was there, obviously it's virtual, but where everyone was there except for Erika, it seems, in my opinion, from my early guesses, that all the girls except for Erika are going to bond over Erika's situation, and they may all be questioning her and kind of putting her on the spot. So we'll see what happens. So let me know what you think of this first episode if you watched it, and if you're watching the replay and you just went back and watched the episode, let me know what you think. Let me know if I missed anything that you thought and wanted me to hear my thoughts on. And I will talk. Oops, I should have kept that up. I will talk to you next week. I'm probably going to do this one every Thursday at 6 p.m. And if I don't do it every Thursday, I'll let you know, or you'll see. I'll catch up the next week in case I can't go live on the Thursday. Because I know I have a few things coming up that maybe would prevent that, but I will catch up on everything as soon as I can. So, with that said, thank you so much for taking the time to watch and listen, and I will talk to you in the next live, next video, I should say. Tomorrow, actually, before I sign off, I'm going to be going live tomorrow at the same time, Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific, with some channel updates and some just general creator thoughts, and so that will help explain kind of what's going on in the future. All right, so I'm finally done. Bye-bye.